I want to thank the music team and Bill for reading today. Our series for August is Who Are We? Getting a better picture of what the Center of Spiritual Living in Southeast Louisiana stands for and what we embrace when we come together, as well as when we're moving through our individual daily lives. Today's topic is conscious spiritual living, and precisely what that means as a way of life for the members of this center. And your question for the week is this: what is the one thing that you might do to live a life in which you consciously choose to allow what lies within you to consistently show up as you on the planet? One more time. What's the one thing that you might do to live a life in which you consciously choose to allow what lies within you to consistently show up as you on this planet? So each week in our community affirmation, we talk about this center being a place where we remember the highest truth about ourselves and where we learn spiritual tools for personal transformation. Today is about how we apply that truth and those tools in our daily lives, especially from the individual point of view. But before I explain what I believe conscious spiritual living means to me as the spiritual leader of this community, I want you to hear what a couple of our congregants believe conscious spiritual living is all about.
Hi, my name is Katrina Smith, and I've been asked to talk about conscious spiritual living. And I would say for me, a major barrier is forgetting who I am, who we are. We are all children of the divine, spirit, God, love and beauty, whatever you want to call it. But we are all spiritual beings. I think it's hard sometimes for us to know and accept at all times that God lives in us. God moves in us, as us. So really, all peace, all love, all joy actually lives in us, in our core also. So if we could, in pure faith and with true acceptance, bring all our worries, our doubts, our fears into that space, then we would find peace, love, and resolution. So then it becomes our daily task, really, is to tap into that space and allow love, peace, and joy that resides within to flow to us, through us, and from us. And then we will be living spiritually, consciously, as God's beloveds, which is really what we truly are. Thank you.
Gloria Nye, Conscious Spiritual Living. Each of us is a creation and an expression of God. And as such, each of us is a center of God consciousness here on earth. As I become more conscious of my connection with God, God fills me with a sense of peace and contentment. It's my thoughts, my consciousness, that opens my spiritual link to God. We're like human Wi-Fi hotspots of God consciousness here on earth. Sometimes the connection is strong. Sometimes it's unstable and goes down. And sometimes we're totally offline. But God's always there waiting for us to reconnect. Our conscious spiritual living is what makes the connection with God work.
Trina and Gloria both provided marvelous descriptions of their way of conscious spiritual living. And I so relate to the connection of which each of them spoke. I was quite moved as Trina was describing the love within us and how giving over our fears and doubts to that divine within us is our true way to peace. That very approach to living is why conscious spiritual living is a crucial part of the foundation of this center. Trina began by saying how a major barrier is forgetting who we are, that we're children of the divine. And she talked about how it's sometimes hard for us to accept that God lives in us and God moves in us, and how we can not know when we look at the forest or the fields of beautiful flowers that God is everywhere. There was a young lady, and she kept asking her mom when she came to visit to please go with her to see these daffodil fields. And every time the mom came to visit, she'd say, next time. And so finally she said, well, okay, let's go this time. So they got in the car, and it was quite a long drive, and then they ended up on these little gravel roads, and they got close to this little church, and the church had a sign that said daffodil fields, and they had an arrow that pointed in that direction. So they started down the path, and they got to a bend, and it was breathtaking. Daffodils as far as the eye could see. It was like somebody had taken a paintbrush and painted the side of the mountain. And there was a little sign that said to go to this lady's cabin to get some answers to your questions. And so they walked up to the lady's cabin, and on the porch there was a big sign, and it said, first answer, 50,000 bulbs. Second answer, one at a time, by one woman, 2 hands, 2 feet, and very little brain. I began in 1958. So when you look at what's going on, this lady was consciously building this field one bulb at a time. And the woman that was the mother, they were driving back, and she was contemplating this 50,000 plus bulbs, and the lady had begun in 1958 doing this all by herself. And the mom said to her daughter, I wonder what I could have accomplished if I had started something 30 or 40 years ago. And the daughter said, start now. Now that's conscious spiritual living. We need to start now. We can let go of the past and start now doing whatever we've been putting off. Gloria's human Wi-Fi hotspot idea, that actually was a great analogy. We do have hotspots with our connection to God. Sometimes our connection is strong, sometimes it's weak, sometimes we're totally offline. And conscious spiritual living is about being aware of our connection. Are our connections with the divine in our daily life, or are we ignoring our connection until something significant happens and we need to be connected? I know that my phone hotspot is sometimes really slow to connect, so I'm sometimes impatient, and I'm definitely not living in my conscious spiritual living life. Can anybody relate to that? So I know that I can get really frustrated when I want my files to upload and it seems like there is either no connection at all, or that it's very, very slow. And I feel that my patience gets tested. And I think the same is true sometimes with our spiritual consciousness. Sometimes I get discouraged when I've been praying about something and it doesn't seem like anybody's listening. I'm praying and seemingly those prayers are going on to deaf ears. That's precisely the time when it's important for me to recognize how to be in the conscious spiritual living of my life. That's precisely when I have to trust in divine order. When I have to know that God's timing is not always my timing. That's a real tough one for me. And when I have to recognize that what I'm praying for may show up in a form other than the way I expected it to show up. And darn if it sometimes doesn't do just that. And what I'm seeing right in front of me, I look past because I'm looking for it to appear some way that I have decided in my mind is the way it should have appeared. This lack of something that is appearing the way I expect it to appear reminds me of this wonderful book and movie called The Little Prince. He teaches us a number of important lessons, and if you haven't read the book or seen the movie, I do recommend it, by the way. It's full of important life lessons and also just a lot of fun to watch. Two of the lessons in the book that I consider vital to conscious spiritual living are these. What is essential is invisible to the eye. And the second one is that the most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or touched. They are felt with the heart. And both of these tell us how to relate to conscious spiritual living. Because we don't live a spiritual life from our head or from the outside. We live it from the inside out. So let's start with the meaning of what is essential is invisible to the eye. How precisely does that relate to conscious spiritual living? Many of you have probably heard quite frequently, spirituality is an inside job. It's not about how we appear on the outside. Jesus tried to tell us that in a parable about two men at the temple. In Luke 18, we read of the parable Jesus told to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous, and so they treated other people with contempt. Now, there were two men that came to the temple, and the parable goes like this. They went up to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee, and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed to God this way. God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, even like that tax collector over there. I fast twice a week, and I give tithes of all that I get. Now, on the other hand, the tax collector was standing far away from the altar, and he wouldn't even lift his eyes up. And he was beating his breast, and he was saying, God, be merciful to me. Be merciful to me. What is essential is invisible to the eye. That humility, that knowing of oneself, and knowing that everybody is divine. So now let's turn to that second quote. The most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or touched. They are felt with the heart. This is what Trina was describing when she was talking in her heartfelt way. The beautiful things are love and acceptance, allowing that to flow in us, through us, as us. We can see loving gestures. We can see sometimes with our eyes, but we mostly feel love with our heart. There's a third lesson for conscious spiritual living, and it's one that I believe is important. The recognition of everyone on this planet, including yourself, as a unique expression of the divine. Ernest Holmes, in This Thing Called You, wrote this. You live in the house of God. The household of God is a household of perfection. It is the secret place of the Most High within you and within all. The inmates of this household are all divine. They will become as divine to you as you permit. Now, let me make it clear that God's household is a household of perfection, but perfection was not meant in the way that we humans seem to define it. Conscious spiritual living is not about achieving perfection by doing everything precisely accurately or precisely right. In fact, Probably most of us missed the mark, which, by the way, is the real Aramaic meaning of the word sin, missing the mark, more than once a day. Hey, I know I do. Perfection in the household of God takes us back to what is essential is invisible to the eye. And I think the important words from that quote that really relate to conscious spiritual living are these. The inmates of this household are all divine. Yes, Holmes is saying we live together in this house of God on this planet, and all the inmates are divine. All the inmates are divine, not some. Now in the Bible, in Colossians 2:9, we have words that remind us of our divinity. For in him all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form. Are you aware of those words in the Bible? For in him all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form. I think our biggest challenge is remembering we are deity in bodily form. We are divine expressions. And the challenge, of course, to see everyone is divine, including ourselves. So I'm going to ask you a question. Do you believe in your own identity? Do you believe in your own divinity? That there is a divine destiny back of each one of us? And how many of you believe in the divinity of everyone we encounter, of everyone living on earth? Okay, so that everyone thing might be a tall order in today's world, and conscious spiritual living allows us to take time to notice the inmates of God's household and see how much divinity we are willing to accept. We don't wear it on the outside like a garment of clothing or as a pin or badge on our clothing. It resides within, invisible to the eye. And we connect with that divinity when we take time to live from that place within us that sees absolutely everyone as divine. When we learn how to live from the secret place of the Most High within us. When we learn how to have confidence in divine presence. When we learn how to permit divinity to shine forth from ourselves and everyone. Because that's when we've learned the secret of conscious spiritual living. And that's when we know that the most beautiful things in the world can't be seen or touched. They're felt with the heart. When you can uncover the perfection in yourself and in everyone else and embrace the secret way of the soul, allowing that divine presence to externalize through you and allowing that gift to be for all of your good, that's when you have conscious spiritual living. So there were these two twins, and they were conceived in the womb, and weeks passed, and as the babies grew, their awareness grew, and they started having a conversation. And they were really becoming more and more joyful as they could do more things and they got more mobile in the womb. And one of them said, "Isn't it fantastic that we've been conceived? Isn't it wonderful to be alive?" And so the twins began to explore the world. And when they discovered the umbilical cord that was bounding them to their mother and that nourished them, they sang for joy. What great love our mother must have for us to feed us and to care for us. But as the weeks grew and they were growing bigger and bigger, suddenly they noticed that a lot had changed. And they noticed that it was getting very crowded in that womb. And so, what does that mean? One of them said. Well, it must mean that our stay in this world is soon to be over. Well, the other twin just got very upset. "Oh no, I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave. I'm comfortable here. I'd rather stay here forever." But the first twin said, well, I don't think we're going to have any choice. I think that we're running out of room and maybe there's life after birth. But the second twin said, well, how can there be? If we lose our lifeline, what's going to happen to us? So they went back and forth over the days. And what happens when we are not in this place anymore? What's going to be the meaning of life? And maybe our mother won't be around and there's no other mother that's going to help us. And the first twin said, oh, I don't believe that. She must exist. And I'm sure she's going to take care of us. Otherwise, why would we be here? But the second twin, of course, said, well, have you ever seen our mother? And maybe she only lives in our imagination. Maybe we just don't understand all this stuff that's going on. I know it's getting tight in here, but hey, we don't know what's out there. Well, days went by and eventually it came time for the day of the big birth. And finally, during that moment, when the twins left their mother's womb, they opened their eyes and they cried out. And when they saw what they saw, they recognized that it was beyond their wildest dreams of how wonderful it could be. So one day, we can be born into that conscious spiritual living and recognize how wonderful it can be. We can let go of that fear that we have of not allowing love and acceptance to be what we see in the world. Which twin are you, the fearful one or the one that's all about change and growth and what have you? Are you not planting your own form of daffodils on earth out of fear? Think about that for a minute. What's keeping you from doing whatever it is that will create that field of magnificent daffodils that's part of what your soul has come here to be? As Trina referred to, we all have fear and doubt. And it's our daily task to tap into that space of love and acceptance that is right within us, and allow it to flow to us, through us, and from us, so that we can get rid of that fear and that doubt, and we can live in that place of love and peace. In Creative Mind, Ernest Holmes wrote, the best way to arrive at the highest consciousness is to have a great faith in the willingness and the ability of life to do all for us by working through us. Wow. Faith in the ability of life to do all for us by working through us. It doesn't say to do some of the things that we want it to do. All for us. We just have to have the consciousness, that conscious spiritual living approach to life that allows the divinity to show up in us every day throughout the day, all the time. We have to have that hot spot that's right within us be on full speed and connected every moment, not some of the times. We can't allow that connection to be turned off some of the times. We can't allow that connection to get dim. And that means that sometimes we have to create our own connections. And Trina, not in her exact words, but in the spirit of what she said was, if we could bring all of our doubts and fears into that space within us where love and acceptance lives, we would find peace and love. So I challenge you this week to live with the other inmates in the house of God, to see their divinity, and to remember the 3 tips that I gave you today about conscious spiritual living. What is essential is invisible to the eye. The most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or touched. They are felt with the heart. And everyone on this planet, including you, is a unique expression of the divine. Let's pray. So just taking a deep, nourishing breath and going into that space where you recognize all that God is. The love, the acceptance, the joy, the peace, the ease, the grace, the freedom of life. And knowing and accepting that you are an expression of that on this planet. Because what I know to be the truth is that when we are living in the truth of who we are, when we are planting our own daffodil field, whatever that might look like, we are living in the joy of life. We are living in that connection. We are living in that household of God where everything seems to be in perfection, and all of our connections with our inmates are ones of divinity, of love, of acceptance. So I am grateful. I am so grateful to this community. I am grateful to this center that teaches people how to consciously live their life, spiritually knowing everyone is connected, that there's only one life. And it's from all that gratitude that I release these words into the law of mind, spirit, and action, knowing the truth that where we are, God is. And God has already said yes to any of our dreams. It's up to us to implement them. So I just say amen, and we can affirm it together. And so it is.